Hello, welcome back. It's Christopher Taylor with Sovereign Harmony. Good to see you back again. Today is Monday, Labor Day in the US. It's about a little after 1 p.m. Pacific time, just to orient you to where I'm at, depending on when you actually see this. So I just wanted to go over what we're heading into entering the fall months. If you saw my last video in July, I did make a preview about one of these things coming up here, Pluto 29 Capricorn. And before I do that, just by the way, it's also a new moon today, new moon in Virgo, about 11 degrees Virgo, around 7 p.m. Pacific time tonight, Monday, September 2nd. And so, be cognizant of that. If you want more detail on that moon, I'm not going to talk about that here, but you can always follow me at Sovereign Harmony Astrology on Facebook. I also post the exact same thing on Instagram, Twitter, and Telegram. So any one of those four, you'll get the same information, but I just posted yesterday about the new moon in Virgo. So feel free to go check that out to understand more how to utilize this moon for this week and a couple weeks following, for example. But anyway, so back to the topic at hand. As you can see right here, I've got a list of what I'm going to go over for the fall. Okay. The big thing, this is pretty major, and if you've seen any of my videos, and I'm just going to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to go over it again for anyone that hasn't. So when it comes to Pluto in sign of Capricorn, it has been in Capricorn. It entered about 2008. It's a very long cycle. It's a 248-year cycle. So when it goes to a sign, it takes a long time. In this case, about 16 years. And it has been in Aquarius for several months, most of this 2024 year. But it's making its final touch. It's retrograding as we speak. And just yesterday, on Sunday, September 1st, it backed into Capricorn for its last stint. In fact, it won't even leave the 29th degree, which is the final degree, the critical degree of Capricorn. It'll turn direct on October 11th at 29 degrees, and then it'll finally exit Capricorn for Aquarius on November 19th. So this period, starting yesterday through the 19th of November, it's about a probably 11-week period, roughly. And this is basically a grand finale for the energies of Capricorn. If you're not familiar with Pluto in Capricorn, or Capricorn in general, Capricorn has a lot to do with top-down structures, centralization of power, abuse of power, et cetera, et cetera. And so the last couple rounds of Pluto in Capricorn, we go back to the 1500s. This was 2 times ago. This is when the Protestant Reformation occurred. Okay, so Martin Luther, at that point, the Catholic Church was the church, right? And now, especially in the U.S., different Protestant denominations are more dominant than Catholicism at this point. But that wouldn't have started if it wasn't for what happened when Pluto was in Capricorn at that time. Okay, so it was a big ripple effect throughout the world. The next round would have been in 1762 to 1778. We all know what happened at the end of that in 1776. Basically, not only the American Revolution, but the start of essentially revolutions away from monarchies. That was the fall of monarchies. Okay, so anytime Pluto has been in Capricorn, it has signified a pretty significant worldwide effect, having to do with power, having to do with how top-down power is distributed. Okay, and in our current time, in 2008, that is when we had the big market collapse, right? And of course, that was due to lots of sketchy behind the scenes corruption, right? People, with different like interest rates and et cetera, people trying to make money off people. So all that corruption kind of showed itself very clearly right away when Pluto entered Capricorn. And in the years that have followed, especially because we've had Neptune in Pisces most of that time since about 2011, there has been nothing but rampant corruption, and it's been pretty well visible, especially because of the internet, right? And so this has been a time when there have been attempts at top-down corruption, top-down power, et cetera, that haven't done as well as they could have if it wasn't for so much information sharing, right? So anyway, we'll start with that one just briefly. So that's the one right here. There's 29 degrees, 59 minutes, so just barely back into Pluto. So this is a random shot from yesterday, just after Pluto re-entered Capricorn. So again, it's only going to sit at that 29th degree before it then eventually moves into Aquarius, November 19th. And so, I'm going to touch on this at the end of this discussion, but we all know the US election is within this window of Pluto in Capricorn at 29 degrees. It's scheduled currently for November 5th, and Pluto will be in Capricorn through November 19th. Now, all kinds of things can happen. There's all kinds of things going on that day. Like, for example, Mars will be um, opposing Pluto on basically in and around election night. Okay. So that's just shenanigans, is all I'm going to say. That's the only word that really wants to come out. So it's the only word I'm going to say. But there's a lot of potential for attempts at manipulating results. Let's put it that way. Okay. That's probably the best way to put it in English. So be on the lookout for that, of course. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But just so we're aware, that's really the main energy. This is this Pluto won't be in Capricorn again for anyone that's alive now. No one will see it unless you're a vampire. And if you are, no judgment. Put a comment in the down below this YouTube video though, because I just want to know who my audience is. So it's okay to be a vampire, but you will be the only ones alive next time that Pluto enters Capricorn. It'll be like 230 years from now. So it's going to be a while. So moving on. The next thing we want to talk about, we got the eclipses coming up. So I always like to come on here and talk about the eclipses when they happen. In this case, we've got a lunar eclipse in Pisces at 25 degrees on September 17th, followed by the solar eclipse at 10 degrees Libra on October 2nd. Okay, and so we'll take them one at a time, and then you'll see I'm going to kind of backtrack from that October 2nd date back to the equinox, and we'll see why in a second. So I usually like to do things in chronological order, but I feel like it's going to make more sense when we look at it in this order. So let's go to that September 17th lunar eclipse. What does that look like? So lots of highlights here. So here's the sun at 25 Virgo, moon at 25 Pisces, and you can see that it is in a pretty tight conjunction to Neptune, the ruler of Pisces, and it's in enough. It's 10 degrees. 10 degrees is pretty wide, but for a conjunction, I think we can take and call that a conjunction as well. So it's also conjunct Saturn, which is going to be opposing Mercury in Virgo. So strong Virgo Pisces axis, something I can relate to. That's essentially what my chart looks like. Lots of Pisces Virgo going on in my chart. In fact, this will land a couple degrees from my sun in Pisces. In fact, so could be big things for me. Who knows? But anyway, so that's a big highlight there. Also, another thing that will be happening around that time on September 17th is we will have Venus opposing Chiron. It looks a little off of an opposition there just because of the cluster here, but that is at 23 degrees Libra, 22 degrees Aries. That's a pretty close opposition. So that'll be opposing each other, and they will both be aspecting Jupiter in Gemini. So a sextile from Chiron to Jupiter and a trine from Venus to Jupiter. Also, that Jupiter and Gemini will be squared by that lunar eclipse. Okay, so a lot of energy going on here. And this eclipse here is a north node eclipse. So we have, when the sun and moon line up according to this invisible point known as the nodes, twice a year, you're going to have a lunar eclipse on one end of the nodes and a solar eclipse on the other. In this case, the lunar eclipse happens on the north node here, kind of far. This is why it's not going to be a total lunar eclipse. For example, it's not going to be a blood moon. That's what they're called if that moon is really close to that north node or south node, it could be a blood moon eclipse. This will not be that. So it's going to be a partial eclipse. It won't be visible everywhere, but it's still significant everywhere. Okay. So when we have a north node lunar eclipse, this has a lot to do with new energy coming in. Okay. So there's almost like the floodgates open for an inward motion. So there's things coming into our lives. Because this is Pisces, this has a lot to do with kind of our overall bigger picture plans on a soul level. Okay. So we might find ourselves recently being like, when am I going to be able to do what I love? When am I going to be able to really align my life to be, in alignment with what I love? And of course, today's new moon in Virgo has a lot to do with that. So that's why I would recommend going to see what I wrote either through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Telegram, Sovereign Harmony Astrology. Go find out what this new moon today is about, because really I want to set that intention with the energy with this new moon, because it's going to allow some opening for what's coming here in mid-September with this eclipse. So just FYI for you. Anyway, so moving on. So and as this energy comes in, it comes in with a mixture of practicality as well as idealism. Okay, that's the Saturn practicality and Neptune idealism. So there is a sense of, wanting to utilize what comes in to help make our dreams come true, help make them tangible, right? And that square to Jupiter, that kind of opens up all kinds of doors because that's in Gemini. So Jupiter itself is already expansive and kind of all over the place in a way. Though that in Gemini, and there's a reason why Jupiter isn't that all that comfortable in Gemini. It's in the sign opposing the sign that it rules, or one of the signs that it rules. It also rules Pisces, but Sagittarius, and so it's very scattered. Okay, so that Saturn is a wide conjunction, but that is really the only thing that can really rein in what wants to come through or potential options that might want to come through. You might have to make some big decisions. And going along with that idea, there is Saturn opposing Mercury and Virgo. Mercury and Virgo Mercury is very comfortable in Virgo. Okay, it's one of the rulers of Virgo, and it's all about analytical approaches. And so this can be a time where we really have to make some decisions because there are going to be multiple options for what could be the road to our dreams, right? And so, and again, this is not just instantaneous in mid-September. This is going to be right on to the holidays, really, that this energy of the fall is going to be with us, where there's a sense of things coming in, options coming in, and, oh, this kind of lifestyle could really set me up for what I really want to work on, the creative projects I want to work on, and things like that. Or, this opportunity could be a way for me to, advance, again, my spiritual intentions, etc. So we could have multiple options coming in. It's going to require that decision making. We're going to have to be discerning. That's a big key word for Virgo, especially Mercury in Virgo, is discerning, saying not this, yes, this, not leaving things maybe. That's not where we're going to be. We're going to have enough options where it seems like we could do that, put some things on the shelf, but we really are going to have to say no in order to really let that yes in. So, and that can sound counterintuitive, but when we're very clear with the universe what we do not want, what is an option but that we're not interested in, well, then what we are interested in can come in a more solid way. Okay, so heads up for that, and then going along with that, like I said, that Venus opposite Chiron is in there as well, and what that's challenging us to do, essentially, is to face our wounds of self-doubt. That's really what Chiron and Aries has to do, and the temptation with Venus and Libra, because this is, again, on the South Node side. This is what we're kind of getting rid of. Okay, it's a temptation to appease others. All right, so we really got to put ourselves first, even if it hurts. And Chiron has a lot to do with hurt, a lot to do with wounds, etc. But it's really standing up for where we want to head, and not what we can do for other people that we're, still clinging to codependencies with, and we think we owe people certain things, certain loyalties, etc. This is about facing those perceived loyalties and just putting our foot down and making our decision, and letting go of the things that we know aren't going to work for us, and then just taking on those opportunities and being grateful for that and moving on from there. So a lot of energy with that Pisces lunar eclipse. And now I'm going to move on to our next one. So that would be a couple weeks later, solar eclipse in Libra at 10 degrees. How that looks. So there is the sun and moon at 10 degrees Libra up here. That's their new moon phase. It's a solar eclipse because they're right on the south node. That is a little closer to the nodes in that case. So that will be closer to a total solar eclipse. That's also bringing in Mercury right there, only off by 1 degree. That's a little deceiving. Again, it's just the way they stack these things because there's not a lot of room in Libra, so Mercury gets pushed out. In reality, those are 30 degrees apart. They're not next to each other. That all kind of wraps in together, though, is this cluster here. So that solar eclipse definitely brings in Mercury. So we're talking about the what is it? Superior conjunction. I couldn't get it off my tongue. The superior conjunction of Mercury and the Sun. So when Mercury goes retrograde, like it just was recently, and I talked about that in my last video, put a comment down if you've had any specific experiences with the Mercury retrograde. Anyway, what that signifies is, that when Mercury made the inferior conjunction in the middle of that retrograde, it was almost like a new moon phase. This is like a full moon phase of that cycle. So this being a solar eclipse and therefore a new moon, it's almost acting like a sort of full moon, but from Mercury's perspective. From Mercury's cycle, it is a culmination period. So we have something culminating, and again, that could have a lot to do with making choices with Mercury in Libra, so it's weighing options, et cetera, et cetera. And then that's happening as a new beginning wants to happen. But the South Node, just like I mentioned, the North Node had a lot to do with energy coming in. South Node has to do with what we're basically eclipsing out of our lives, right? And what this really is, before I even look at the rest of what's going on here, just in general, if we're looking at a solar eclipse, South Node, Libra, this is about releasing, almost like in the theme of the lunar eclipse that had Venus in Libra opposing Chiron, we're having to leave old relationship patterns behind. And that's literally codependency. Okay. That is anything that codependent patterns include things like parent-child relationship. A lot of times people get married and one just takes on the parent, one takes on the child. One's the authority, the ultimate authority. The other one's always asking permission. And it kind of goes on like that. And it can go male, female, female to male. It doesn't matter. I've seen many different iterations of that. There's trauma bonding, right? Where you both have similar wounds in your life. And so it's like there's a sense of loyalty to each other for those wounds. But the thing is, it doesn't really promote healing. Because if you want to get past your wounds, then what do you have to work on with your relationship? If one of you heals, the other one doesn't, for example, or if you both heal, now what do you got? Right? So that's another codependency. And then probably one of the most popular codependencies would be the possession dynamic, right? This is where it's really an avoidance of connection is where it comes from. It's where you see each other as objects of that need to be obtained rather than human beings that you want to connect to, right? And so this is where games come in. This is where chasing and running come in. Right? It's all possession dynamic. But it's all an avoidance of connection is really what it does. And it's all very uneven. It can go back and forth, etc. But it's those kinds of examples. It's in general with Pluto entering Aquarius. Here, in November, it'll be final for 20 years. It'll be in Aquarius. There's a real transformation of the way we relate to each other from a more sovereign perspective. And it's only from sovereignty that you can actually experience connection with another human being. You can't do that if you're in a codependent state. You need to, be fully working on your own facilities, fully connected to your higher self without the influences of other people. And only from that position can you really deeply connect with someone. Otherwise, it's too scary. Otherwise, you feel like you're going to lose yourself because you don't have those sovereign boundaries established, essentially. Okay. But anyway, so this is kind of just on a greater scale, some of what's happening during this phase of the nodes moving through Aries and Libra is, in general, we are letting go of these more codependent patterns and opening up to more sovereign patterns. That's that North Node in Aries. It's more about putting yourself first, and that isn't selfish. It's the whole mask on your face before you put it on your child. Okay, and what's also interesting is the ruler of the North Node in this situation is Mars, and that's squaring the solar eclipse here. Okay, and that's in Cancer. And so Mars in Cancer is not very direct. It is, it tends to kind of like a crab. The symbol of Cancer it kind of goes side to side. Doesn't want to be directly face to face. It wants to scatter around and figure out how it can get around things rather than go through things. Okay, and so this whole process of releasing those old codependent patterns, it's not exactly easy, and it's not exactly something that it's probably going to take a lot of trial and error. So again, over the coming months of the fall, heading into the new year, already coming up to 2025 here in a few months, believe it or not, that is going to be what's going to be worked out. So there's going to be a lot of reoccurrence of the codependent patterns for the purpose of recognizing them. Okay, so it's a lot of like, this time I did it right. That time, We're old patterns. So it's good to be outside of judgment for this because it could be a process. Let's put it that way. And then final part of this, the ruler of Libra, and therefore the South Node and the solar eclipse itself, that's Venus. It's in Scorpio, and it's in a nice little trine to Saturn in Pisces. Okay, so that's actually really good for the idea of gently working on relationship patterns. Okay, so it goes with the theme, but this is that sense of discipline and not giving up, right? Because again, people are tempted to stay in old patterns, but this kind of gives a signature to this process that, if you stick with it and do the work, it can be done, can be achieved. Anyway, so that's really the major themes of the eclipses themselves. Now for like more overarching information, this is why I want to do it in this order. Okay, now we're going to talk about this all together at once. So the equinox is September 22nd, like it is pretty much every year, right around that time. That's when the sun enters Libra, 0 degrees Libra, and that's the official, start of autumn or fall. Even though, depending on your definition, I would say it starts September 1st, in my opinion. That's because that's meteorological calendar, and I'm originally meteorology major back in the day. So to me, September seems like the start of fall. So I feel like we're in fall already, but that is technically the equinox. Okay. What is also happening this fall is kind of unique to this fall. We just had Uranus go retrograde yesterday, just as the same day that Pluto re-entered Capricorn, going retrograde. Uranus is going retrograde in late degrees of Taurus. Okay. And only for a couple of months here, we have this signature happening, but it's a preview of what we're going to see late 2025 into early 2026, I should say, to the spring of 2026. And I have mentioned this in previous videos. Okay. And so we have what some people are calling a mini grand trine, which doesn't make any sense to me because there's only one trine actually happening. That's between Uranus in Taurus to Pluto now in Capricorn, right? They're two Earth signs. But in the midst of that, we have two sextiles. So Uranus is also making a sextile to Neptune. So really, Neptune's kind of in between Uranus and Pluto. Okay, it's splitting them. So you take that 120-degree angle between Uranus and Pluto, but Neptune in between there in the late degrees of Pisces, and boom, we've got ourselves this mini grand trine or whatever you want to call it. Either way, it's very significant because these three planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, these are the outer planets. They move very, very slowly. Uranus moves pretty quickly relative to the other two, but very slowly in general. So, and what's going to happen with this is they're making this formation in those late degrees of the Earth and water signs. So again, Uranus in earthy Taurus, Neptune in the middle there in the watery Pisces, and then Pluto at the end of earthy Capricorn. They're all going to shift signs in roughly a very short period of time. So we're going to get Pluto enters Aquarius, like we said, in November, but then we're going to get both Uranus and Neptune entering their new signs. Uranus will exit Taurus for Gemini, and Neptune will exit Pisces for Aries. It'll both happen around the middle of 2025, but then they're going to come back. Then they're going to make their final pass into those signs in early 2026. So mid to late 2025, around this time next year, we're going to have this same kind of pattern, but they're going to be in those three new signs. So it's going to be, again, Uranus in Gemini, with Neptune in the middle in Aries, and then Pluto in Aquarius. Okay. And that is a huge shift on a collective level. It has much more to do with collective shifts than it does with personal shifts. And this is something, like I said, I mentioned last time, and we'll get into it here in a little bit. So this is a picture of the equinox. So that's Sun, 0 degrees, Libra. And what's interesting is it's right around that time that the ruler of Libra, right as the sun just enters Libra, it's about to exit Libra. You can see at 29 degrees. It is making aspects to all three, Uranus in late degrees Taurus, Neptune in late degrees Pisces, and Pluto in late degrees Capricorn. It's making a yod to this sextile. So a yod is when you have a sextile with a planet right halfway in between them on the other side. And then Venus is also squaring Pluto. So this is pretty significant. This equinox, it has a signature of exiting, having to do with exiting out the old energy and previewing the new energy that's coming in. And the fact that this is happening again during this contentious election season in the U.S. And with all that's gone on in the last two cycles of presidential elections and whatnot, and how the media has been and behaved. Okay, the biggest thing that I see with these planets where they are has been especially Pluto in Capricorn with Neptune in Pisces. That I mean, this sextile, just to let you know, between Pluto and Neptune has been going on for about 80 years. So anyone that's like 80 or younger, you have that sextile in your chart. It's going to be in different signs, obviously, because both of them are migrating through the zodiac, but they're never getting too far enough away from each other to really break it. They're still going to be doing that for another 10 years or so. So it's an interesting, long because they move at relatively the same pace. Okay. Whereas Uranus, it's going through every sign every 7 years. So it's whips on through relatively quickly, but only relatively because it's still not that quick. And what I see with these two, especially, and this was since 2008 with Pluto and Capricorn, and this is since 2011 with Neptune and Pisces. This, to me, has a lot to do with that top-down corruption here and the mainstream media stories and narratives. That's what this really has to do with. Okay, and so the collusion of that. Okay, it was in 2011, in fact, or 2012, I think it was, when there was what's called the Smith-Bunt or something Modernization Act. And essentially it was under the Obama administration and has essentially made it legal. All right. Sorry about that disruption. Zoom or the internet or whatever tried to skip out on me there. So where I was, I don't know how well I'm going to edit this when it comes to it. Not exactly the most skilled, but I do what I can. And anyway, I was talking about how the significance of Pluto and Neptune, Pluto and Capricorn, Neptune and Pisces, and how this has been going on for many years. Pluto since 2008, Neptune since 2011. And literally there was an act, the Smith-Bunt Act, in about 2012 that legalized propaganda. And that's when it cut out. So I don't know if someone's listening to me, but when I was going to say that it legalized propaganda, that's when everything went kaput there. But that's what it did. And so ever since 2012 or so, we really have been experiencing the media as a propaganda outlet. In other words, a public relations arm of politicians, rather than being what journalism is supposed to be, which is supposed to be that go-between between the people and the politicians, that ask the tough questions to politicians and give the people the answers they need. But it was around that time, and not that it wasn't happening before that, but really it ramped up and locked in around that time, around 2012 or so. And I had to switch my angle here just to get a good internet connection. So if the background looks a little different, that is why. And now I got the sun on this side of my face instead of on my face. So if you notice that difference too. Anyway, but point being is that this is kind of the final, the grand finale. It's probably a better way to put it. Grand finale for this energy with Uranus as part of the mix. Uranus and Taurus has a lot to do with the economy, etc. So, I mean, I just wouldn't put it past, especially because we got Venus involved in here, and Venus rules money and things like that. I wouldn't put it past the establishment authorities to create some kind of monetary disruption here leading up to the election, especially if the polls aren't looking the way that they want them to, right? And it's interesting what has happened since I posted my last video in July. At that point it was still Mr. Magoo and the Orange Man, and now we've got the lady and the Orange Man. So they did make a switcheroo, and they went from the establishment was using that left wing as the way to say, oh, we're protecting democracy, and they literally just ignored democracy when they installed the lady in front of Mr. Magoo. And I'm using code words, you know who they are. I just don't want this flagged for censorship and whatnot. So just interesting that democracy was completely ignored and put aside so the establishment can get their way, right? And someone now all of a sudden someone who had like zero votes in the primaries in 2020, that's the favorite. That's who everyone wants. So anyway, not that just as an objective viewer of the whole situation, like an alien looking down at what's going on, that's my observation of it being the Pisces that I am. Anyway, But I want to talk about the significance of this configuration. Okay. So again, these will move into their next signs: Gemini for Uranus, Neptune for into Aries, and then Pluto back into Aquarius. And they're going to form this formation again in late 2025 into early 2026. And for me, that switch takes us from that sort of mass scale propaganda to independent, that's what Aries has to do with, independent stories being Neptune. So this is where, in my opinion, independent media takes over mainstream media. So we're literally about a year away from the beginning of it, and it'll only take about 6 months before it completely breaks down, in my opinion. And that really breaks down the entire establishment system, okay? Regardless of who wins, this is happening. And that's why, like, when it comes, I'll talk about that in a second, it just doesn't matter so much who wins, because we're heading in this sort of, whether we take one street to get where we're going or a different street, we're still heading in the same destination. That's kind of where we're at now. There's different styles of getting there. There's different preferences people might have on getting there, but we're getting there nonetheless. And it really ultimately doesn't matter. Okay. It's just interesting to see how the establishment dynamic is playing out, and how this is going to be the last desperate effort of top-down control with mass mainstream media influence and potential disruption of the financial systems as a part of it. Going back to this idea, so like I said, Uranus moves a lot quicker than these two. These two have been in a sextile, like I said, for about 80 years now. So anyone in your chart, you're going to see Pluto sextiling Neptune in your chart, no matter who you are, if you're 80 years old or younger. Okay, that's just the way it is. But Uranus can move on through. So you can picture, like, as these are moving through, you can picture Uranus kind of buzzing through them both, right? I did, if you look on my YouTube channel, scroll back a little bit, you can find, like, it'll be in the title, power generations. If you find the video on power generations, it's something I did probably 2016, I think. It's around that time. And I go into the configurations of these three planets, especially in how they play out. And just to show you, like, kind of a brief preview of what that's about. So take Uranus and back it through when it was with Pluto. This is what it looked like in the late 1960s, okay? We had Pluto and Uranus together, and there's that sextile between Pluto and Neptune, in play in the late 1960s. Like I said, it's been in play for about 80 years, so that was only 20 years into it. And at that time, Uranus was with Pluto. So it was a very powerful generation where those three planets were in a tight configuration with each other. Then we go to the next power generation that I call it. Like, and you have to go into that video to really dig into. I'm not going to get deep into it, but now Uranus, when it moved halfway through, this was in the late 70s, around 1980. This is when I was born, right around there. So now Uranus is splitting the uprights between that Pluto-Neptune sextile. Okay, so there's some significance there. And then we have the final rung is when Uranus hits Neptune. Okay, so again, Pluto and Neptune still in their sextile, but now Uranus has caught up to Neptune. So where we're at now, if we go back there, so now Uranus has moved past Neptune, and now it's at a point where it's at a major aspect, the first time that it's in a major aspect to both of the planets at the same time. Because Uranus was squaring Pluto back 2012 to 2015, if you remember that. I have videos on that too, but you got to go scroll pretty far back for that. But that was going on. But as far as these three being configured together, this is the first time since the early 90s, so in about a little over 30 years, since they were configured together, when Uranus was with Neptune, sextiling Pluto with Neptune as well. So this is significant to me. And I actually mentioned this in 2016. At this time in the mid-2020s was going to be coming up. And so I look at that swath of 30-ish years between the late 60s and the mid-90s as what I call the power generations. Okay, there's those three nodes that we talked about, like when it was exact, but really the whole window is what we can call the power generations. And what's interesting about that, and I talk about it in that video as well, is that now that younger group, the ones born in the early to mid 90s, they are just about finishing up their Saturn returns right now. So that's like the end of the window. So now the entire window of that power generation is within their first and second Saturn return. With the first rung, the ones born in the late 60s, they're about to approach their second Saturn return. Okay, but at this moment right now, where the power generations are entirely contained within the first and second Saturn return. In fact, I just had my Saturn opposition because I was born in that middle node in the late 70s there, where Uranus was in between Pluto and Neptune. And the reason why I call them power generations is because in all three cases, we'll see here, Scorpio's involved. So in the first case in the late 60s, they had Neptune in Scorpio. In the second case, and when I was born, Uranus was in Scorpio. And then in the final case, we have Pluto in Scorpio. Okay. And so Scorpio being a planet of death and transformation and power, etc. That's why I named it what I did. And that's because that they all have to do with power and power transmutation in some form. And so now that we're at this point where Uranus this fall here is going to make its aspects to both Neptune and Pluto. This really is a culmination. It's almost like what we came in for. Now is the time to implement it. Okay, and so I think the souls that are being born that are this fall through the next 18 months or so, especially, they're really going to be a special group of souls that are really only here for the new Earth and not the old. And so it's up to the power generations to create the new Earth, right? And so we're all in between 30-ish and not quite 60-ish yet, like, like late 50s. That's where the whole entire cluster of folks falls. We're really the ones in the middle of this that are here for this transition. And I think as this, double sextile trine moves into new signs in 2025, 2026, that really does signify that shift. It's really the end again. It's Neptune entering Aries. It's the independent media taking over mass media. It's Uranus entering Gemini. Now we talk about information out of control. That's a really good way to phrase that. Information out of control. The mainstream media, the politicians, the establishment, it's all about control of information, right? And so with Uranus in Gemini, there you go. Now information is officially out of control. And so you have to use your own discernment to trust what is true and what is not. And that's where the influence of independent media comes from here, Neptune in Aries. And then in addition to that, we have Pluto in Aquarius, that kind of sets the backdrop. And this is where, again, sovereignty, independence, decentralization of power. And so this is really, in my opinion, what the power generations came in for. So again, starting with the late 60s people, ending with the early mid 90s, and anything in between, including right in the middle where I was born, that this is the generations that really are going to make the biggest difference in this transition. Okay, so a lot of information here. Anyway, that's just more of the higher level stuff that's going on as well. So that kind of covers us here. So I'm going to end it there as far as that goes. I did promise that I would talk more about the election. So, who do we think is going to win? Does it matter? I kind of alluded to it. It really doesn't. And in reality, this is probably the most accurate prediction you're going to get. The oligarchs are going to win all the votes, and the people are going to win zero. Okay, and that's just the way it is in the old system. Okay, and this is, again, we have Pluto back in Capricorn. This is the final hurrah for this kind of setup. And I did mention that the Orange Man, his whole sole purpose is to disrupt, and he's doing a really good job at it. Disrupt the system. Okay, that's what he came in for, and you can watch that my last video for more information on that. But there's that path, and then there's the establishment path, which is, they don't care if they're using democracy or not. They're going to push in whatever they want. And I just want to leave us with that one. So, the man who agrees with the media, universities, corporations, and Hollywood thinks he's part of the resistance. And this is, it's a funny thing. Like, you definitely see this, like, if you're in social media in any way, sense, or form, people think they're resisting the Orange Man, who's been made, basically created by the media as enemy number one. Forget about all the things that are coming up about the establishment itself through the presence of that disruption. Just focus all that angst on that one person. Like, that's exactly what happened. And again, it's not, I have no allegiance to anyone in particular, just how I see it objectively speaking. It doesn't matter who wins, okay? Because there's going to be two different paths. If he wins, then the establishment is going to show their true colors. Okay, they're going to probably attempt to assassinate him while he's president. They're probably going to have the Soros-funded riots and things like that going on in the streets, just like we had in 2020. They're going to do all the things that the establishment does because there's a disruption to the establishment in office, right? And it's going to just make it so blatantly obvious that by the time we get to next fall and we have those planetary switches of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, again, this is where people lose all faith in mainstream media. Okay, now the other path, now the establishment wins. And if you look at the polls right now, I mean, their only chance of winning is to really, really Mars opposite Pluto that election, which is what I said is happening during election night. We have Mars opposite Pluto. So if that happens and the obvious person doesn't win, the one that the polls say is going to, then it's going to be obvious that the establishment is doing too much and whatnot. Either way, point is, either way, the establishment exposes themselves for the final time through this election. Doesn't matter who wins. Either road will lead to the collapse of the mainstream media, which is their public relations mouthpiece. It's going to lead to the complete lack of confidence in leadership and all these, career politicians and whatnot. And there's going to be a real, I think, resurgence of the spirit of what the U.S. was founded on, which is the people representing themselves, not having some ruling class over us. That's that's really what this Pluto and Capricorn round is about, because we had the fall of the Catholic Church in place of the Protestant Reformation and all the different denominations that you have in the 1500s, and that didn't go away. That shift in power was permanent. Okay, then we have the shift away from monarchies in the late 1700s for independence. It started with the U.S. Again, that hasn't gone in a different direction. No one's going back to monarchies. And I think this round, 2008, beginning with the market crash, and then now coming into this 2024 election, that doesn't matter who wins because they're going to be exposed no matter what. This is really the end of career politicians, establishment, top-down ownership of information, et cetera, et cetera. And it's going to be a real resurgence here in the mid-2020s and beyond as Pluto moves through Aquarius of decentralization of power, power back to the people, of, again, understanding that we represent ourselves. And we're not going to, vote in some ruling class to rule over us. Okay. So as far as election goes, it just doesn't matter. Okay. I wouldn't attach yourself to any result in that case. It's going to be a shit show either way. And it's going to end the same way, essentially, eventually. Anyway, on that note, so I do offer personal consultations. You can see all the information right here. What I'm really trying to ramp up is the creating compatibility consultation. That does start here. You can see at $250. That's for couple or two, or it's a parent or child, teammates, or a romantic couple. Doesn't matter if it's one-on-one. I mean, this is a really valuable set of insights. I look into both natal charts in terms of potential for relationship and what they're each looking for as individuals. Look at their synastry. How do their energies work with each other? I look at the composite chart. If you're not familiar with that, that is looking at the energy of the relationship as a separate entity, which is unique to any two individuals. You're not going to find another composite chart with another individual will match that one with that certain individual. Okay. I also use progress composites, things like that, as well as my favorite chart in that creating compatibility consultation, which is one that's hard to get sometimes, but it's based on first meeting. It's that first, if it helps if someone remembers the date that they met, time that they met, and the place that they met. They have all that information. That chart is extremely valuable for the progression of things and how things move. That is one of my favorite ones to use. That being said, this can also be expanded to group, looking at groups. And of course, that would be slightly adjusted there to different group settings. But you can use this for businesses, families. I've done this one for a family on Christmas Eve one time. And it was really, really revealing to a lot of the people as they split them up in their little sectors, their little elements, and discovering things about their family members that disagreements that they now all of a sudden resolved out of nowhere because of some insights they got that night. So really, really valuable tool. And going back to the idea of Pluto in Capricorn, and think about where you were in 2008 when Pluto entered Capricorn. For me, that was literally my Saturn return, happened that year. And it was when I went from mostly conventional kinds of office work to diving into astrology as a professional outlet. And to this day, it is still not my number one source of income, of course, But ever since that point, I actually got laid off that year, and then I was mixing different kinds of work, and the work has never been the same for me, as far as making money since 2008. Let's put it that way. And so now it's fitting I'm entering this last phase here, and I literally just lost my job, my main source of income. And so this would be a really good time for me if anyone, if it's a good time for you, if it's not a good time for you, don't worry about it. But if it is a good time for you to have a consultation or to look into a partnership or something like that, it really works out for me right now because I'm kind of scrambling right now. In fact, my recent job for the last 7 years, I haven't even had a home. I've been just on the road. My job is paid for my lodging when I'm working, and then I pay for something, Airbnb or something when I'm off. And so I'm lots of freedom, lots of like moving around. And that just ended. So now I am officially, on paper, jobless and homeless. So hoorah. So I got to scramble, figure out something here real quick. But if I could help somebody out here, it would help me out too. So anyway, and just a reminder, if you want to look at more into creating compatibility, that is, I go into it, piece by piece here, more in my YouTube playlist. So go to my YouTube playlist for creating compatibility. You can find all these videos if you want more details, especially when it comes to using this in a group setting. Because in a personal setting, I'm going to go a lot deeper than this. This is more conventionally digestible. So for like businesses and families and things like that, we're not going to get super deep when we're looking at a group, but go a lot deeper with those charts I mentioned in the creating compatibility for two people, whether it's coworkers or partners or whatever, doesn't matter. But look into that. So I think we'll wrap it up there. It's been pretty long here. I apologize for the length of time here, but there's a lot of information to get into. If you have any questions, do feel free to ask. You can make comments on YouTube. You can contact me through my website, sovereignharmony.com. And again, if you're interested in setting something up here in the near future, that would be great. I would love to help you. And like I said, right now, unless something could happen here in the next week or two, and I could be fine. But in the meantime, this could be beneficial. So have a great fall. Don't let the Pluto and Capricorn bite you too hard, and don't sweat the election too much. It's not worth even picking a side at this point because it's going to end in the same direction. And again, thanks for coming, and we will see you again next time. Bye-bye.